Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, reading stuff I've written to entertain you during our long national nightmare. Back in about 25 years ago, Star Trek Deep Space Nine was on the air, and in its fourth season, they did an episode called Hippocratic Oath. That episode ended with the Dr. Bashir and Chief O'Brien's friendship damaged, at the very least, due to decisions that were made in that episode. Usually Deep Space Nine was really good about following up with stuff like that, but in this case they didn't. The next time, eventually, Bashir and O'Brien were back to being bros again, playing darts and quarks and everything. And they never really established how they resolved the differences that came up in that episode. So in 2003, when Marco Palmieri put together the Star Trek Deep Space Nine anthology, Prophecy and Change, the story that I pitched to Marco to do for that was a story called Broken Oaths, which would follow up from Hippocratic Oath and actually have O'Brien and Bashir working out their differences, as it were. So, without further ado, here is my story. Gotta get to it. Broken Oaths in the Prophecy and Change anthology. O'Brien and Bashir's dartboard remained unused. Quark wasn't too bothered by this. The tables and bar stools were occupied by customers consuming their libation of choice. Many were absent-mindedly munching on sand peas, which made them finish their drinks faster, thus prompting them to ask for refills. The Dabo tables were all filled to capacity. Off in the corner, young Jake Sisko was hustling a couple of Bolians at the Domjot table. Upstairs, all the holosuites were booked until closing. But the dartboard just sat on the wall. Quark could afford that, of course. He didn't profit directly from the board's use, nor did its lack of use have a significant effect on his bottom line. He had installed the thing in the first place only because it was small and unobtrusive, and because two of his best customers requested it. As a bartender, Quark was especially mindful of the 57th rule of acquisition. Good customers are as rare as latinum. Treasure them. If the two of them wanted to spend their time in Quarks, throwing tiny spears at a series of concentric circles, who was Quark to deny them? Ironically, those two customers were both present, sitting separately. Dr. Julian Bashir sat at the bar with the ever-delectable Lieutenant Commander Jadzia Dax, while Chief Miles O'Brien was at one of the tables with the less-than-delectable Lieutenant Commander Worf. In fact, Quark hadn't seen Bashir and O'Brien together at all since they returned from a mission to the Gamma Quadrant weeks earlier. But hey, he thought, as long as they're coming in and drinking, I don't care who they sit with, or whether or not they throw pointy things at a wall. As he refilled Morn's ale, he heard Dax and the doctor's conversation. I notice you and the Chief haven't gotten together much lately. No darts games, no racquetball, no holosuites. We just haven't, Bashir said. As he put Morn's ale glass back on the bar in front of the Lurian, Quark frowned. Bashir didn't normally sound that crestfallen, especially since he got that secret agent program of his. Well, Quark did go to all the trouble of putting the board in. You should at least play a few games just to give him something to have for side bets. As if those side bets brought in enough to be worth it. Quark had to admit, though, that those side bets did bring a profit, albeit a small one. With a level of defensiveness Quark had never heard Bashir use with Dax, the doctor said, I'm really not interested in lining Quark's pockets, Jadzia. Well, of course not, but still, look, I have to go. Quark glanced over to see Bashir gulping down his tea and getting up from the bar. Dax, for her part, looked as crestfallen as Bashir had sounded moments earlier. All right. Don't forget, we need to go over those new radiation protocols tomorrow morning. Bashir flashed that idiotic smile of his. Finally, the old doctor. I'll be there. And, sorry I snapped at you. I've just been a little tired lately. Good night, Jadzia. Good night. Quark shook his head. Dax stared down at her. Alira Punch, looking disappointed in herself. He walked over. Come on, Jadzia, what did you expect? Some people don't like having their personal lives interfered with. Dax arched an eyebrow. Eavesdropping, Quark? Holding up his hands defensively, Quark said, just trying to see to the needs of my customers. That would be yes, then. Look, for whatever reason, Bashir and O'Brien aren't best friends anymore. It happens. It wasn't that long ago that they couldn't stand each other. If I've learned one thing as a bartender, Quark, Dax said with a mild glower, I've learned plenty of things about friendships over the centuries I've been alive, so I really don't need a lesson from you. Oh, I think you do. I see people come in and out of here all the time. One minute they're inseparable, betting together at Dabo, experimenting with the same exotic Klingon beverages, sharing holosuite programs. The next they can't stand it, the sight of each other, come in separately, and sit with different people. It happens, especially with these humans. Dax finished off her drink and gestured for another. I guess what bothers me is that I don't know what happened. I mean, I know they were captured by some Jem'Hadar in the Gamma Quadrant and then escaped. Julian even found a Jem'Hadar that wasn't dependent on Ketracel White. But something happened there. They don't play darts, they don't play racquetball, the Chief's been working overtime, and Julian's been spending all his spare time in the holosuite with that secret agent program with Garak, of all people. Quark shrugged as he placed a fresh glass of punch in front of the science officer. O'Brien had also been booking extra holosuite time, mostly that kayaking program he brought over from his previous posting. So as far as he was concerned, the sundered friendships meant double the holosuite usage. Somehow, though, he doubted that Dax would appreciate a reminder of that. He looked over at O'Brien and noticed that both his synthale and the Klingon's prune juice were running low. Excuse me, he said to Dax, who nodded absently, having gone back to staring at her drink. No doubt plotting some way to trick Bashir into revealing why he doesn't like O'Brien anymore. Personally, I never understood those two in the first place. As he approached the table where the two men sat, he heard a surprising exchange. I have observed that you and Dr. Bashir have not engaged in your target practice of late. To Quark's abject shock, the tiniest hint of the most infinitesimal glimmer of a smile approached the beginnings of existing on Worf's face. He knew that the Klingon and O'Brien had served on the same ship in the past, the Endeavour, or the Odyssey, or the Voyager, or some other such ship. Quark can never keep track of them. Indeed, Worf usually only came to Quark's in O'Brien's company, which suited Quark fine. Worf was the most recent addition to the crew of Deep Space Nine, and the Ferengi would have been just as happy for him to be the next attraction. The amusement value of a Klingon who drank prune juice had worn off pretty quickly. If he didn't use the holosuites as often as he did, he'd be of no use to Quark whatsoever. As it was, the floors and walls always needed repairs after he was done with them. In response to Worf's observation, O'Brien muttered, "We just haven't. It is a surprising development. I was under the impression that you enjoyed the contests." "We did, I suppose," O'Brien said pensively, "but things changed. Look, I really don't want to talk about this." "I understand." Okay, this is weird, Quark thought. Dax, being a busybody, the Ferengi could understand. It was her nature. But Worf? "Can I refill your drinks, gentlemen?" Before either of them could reply, a voice sounded from the comm badge affixed to the Chief's uniform. "Chief O'Brien, please report to the Defiant." O'Brien gave Quark a half smile. "I guess none for me, Quark." To Worf he said, "Excuse me, Commander." "Of course." O'Brien departed, leaving Quark staring at Worf's impassive face. More prune juice? Worf's glower was far nastier than Dax's. No. Then he too rose and moved toward the exit. Dax, however, intercepted him on the way out. "Did you ask him?" "Aha, now it makes sense," Quark thought. "Yes." When no more information was forthcoming, Dax, who looked like she was ready to jump out of her spots, asked, "Well, what did he say?" Impatiently, Worf said he did not wish to speak of it. "So then what did you say?" Worf frowned. "I told him I would respect his wishes and not speak of it." Dax smacked him gently on the arm. Quark suspected that she was one of the few people in the quadrant under the rank of captain who could get away with such an action. "What did you say that for?" "Because I saw no reason to pry into Chief O'Brien's personal life, and I still see no reason to." "Well, I do. That friendship is good for both of them. Julian needs someone in his life like the Chief, a stabilizing influence. And with Keiko and Molly spending most of their time on Bajor, the Chief needs to have more friends around, not fewer." "It is not our place to interfere." "Like hell. Julian's my friend, O'Brien's your friend. You delivered his baby." Quark blinked in something like shock. The bartender had an active imagination, but even he could not wrap his mind around the idea of Worf's delivering a baby. Dax continued, "We owe it to them to do whatever we can to bring them back together." Deciding that this was the point where he needed to reiterate his view, Quark said, "You're wasting your time." Worf turned angrily on the Ferengi. "This is not your concern." "Hey, they're my customers, and so are you," he said to Dax. "And even you," he added with a quick nod to Worf. Turning back to the Trill, he said, "Look, I think this is a waste of time. The commander here thinks this is a waste of time. Now, if the two of us agree on something, don't you think it might have a bit of merit?" Dax pursed her lips. "No, excuse me." Quark and Worf watched her go. Silence hung between them for a moment. "So," Quark finally said, "you delivered Molly." The Ferengi's sensitive ears heard the growl build in Worf's throat, probably before the Klingon was aware he'd done so. "Never mind. Sure you don't want more prune juice?" Worf then also left the bar. "Or not." Quark went back behind the bar, staring at the unused dartboard. "Maybe I'll just take the thing down." "I'm not sure what you expect me to do, old man. I can't order them to be friends again." Dax sat in Benjamin Sisko's office, watching the captain toss his baseball from hand to hand. She had been observing that particular set of gestures for years. It had gone from a method of burning off nervous energy to a habit that Sisko couldn't, and didn't care to, break. "Well, why not?" At Sisko's glower, Dax smiled. I know, I'm just frustrated. Worf and I have been trying to get them to open up about what happened in the Gamma Quadrant, but Sisko almost dropped the ball. "Worf? How'd you get him to help out?" Her smile widened. "He owes me one." "I don't want to know," Sisko said quickly. Dax was grateful. She had been able to play on Worf's gratitude for saving the Klingon's life during the search for the Sword of Kahless. However, the details of that search had, of necessity, been kept secret, even from Sisko. "Anyhow, it's not doing any good. They won't talk about it." Dax got up and started pacing across Sisko's office. "And I can't get any clue from their log reports to give me an idea." "You read the log reports?" Actually, I'd already read them. Julian's theories on why Goranagar wasn't addicted to the white were fascinating reading, but this time I was looking at them to see what actually happened there. But the reports were sparse. "You think they held back facts in their report?" Sisko's tone had hardened, the baseball now being clenched in his hand. He had temporarily stopped being her old friend Benjamin and gone back to being her commanding officer. Dax realized that she was now accusing two of her crewmates of falsifying a report. No, nothing like that. Just," she sighed, "I don't know, the context is missing. Some people file reports that are dry recitations of facts." Chuckling, she said, "Remember the way you used to file every report to Curzon so spit and polished that he started asking you to provide a stimulant with the reports to keep from falling asleep?" "I remember." Sisko's lips twitched in that almost smile of his, and he started tossing the baseball again. "You told me that people would be reading these reports centuries from now, and you didn't want them all to think that all Starfleet officers were automatons." In a passing impression of Curzon's imperious tones, Sisko added, "Pretend it's one of your father's recipes, young Sisko, and put some spice into it." Laughing, Dax said, "Exactly. Well, Curzon would have loved Julian's reports. He's always inserting philosophical asides and odd theories." "True, but not this one." They crash-landed on Bopak 3. Goranagar asked Julian to try to find out why the planet cured him of the white dependence. Julian theorized that it wasn't the planet, but that Goranagar was born without the addiction, and then O'Brien engineered an escape. Sisko let out a long breath. "I've read the reports too, old man. And, style notwithstanding, I didn't see anything that's a cause for concern." Dax shot him a look. "You didn't?" "I've worked with both of them for over 3 years now, and I know that they would never leave something out of an official report without a damn good reason, and that they wouldn't do anything to harm Starfleet or this station." "So you're saying you have no cause for professional concern?" Getting up and walking around to the other side of the desk to face Dax, Sisko said, "That's right. As for personal concerns," he tossed the ball in the air toward Dax, who caught it unerringly. "That's outside my purview as their commanding officer." Again, Dax sighed. Sisko's implication, that it was outside the science officer's purview as well, was, strictly speaking, true. And his comment about leaving something out of an official report hit closer to home than he even knew. Or maybe he does know. Benjamin's gotten pretty good at keeping his cards close to the vest. Curzon taught him well. Holding up the ball for him to take back, she said, "Point taken, Captain. Thanks for letting me vent. My door is always open." Sisko grinned, took the baseball back, and walked back around to his desk chair. "And Dax, I'm not telling you not to pursue this either." Worf reveled in the feeling of the serpent worms wriggling down his gullet. The transition to living and working on Deep Space Nine after almost 8 years on the Enterprise was proving more difficult than Worf would have imagined. But those problems were mitigated by the presence of the Klingon restaurant. As much as the replicators on the Enterprise had been fine-tuned to provide decent enough Klingon fare, there was simply no substitute for live gach. When he was done with the meal, he flagged down Chef Kaga and ordered a roquette blood pie for dessert, then took out a pad to read over the latest fuel consumption report from the Defiant while he waited. "Commander, do you have a minute?" Looking up, he saw Chief O'Brien. This surprised Worf, as O'Brien had, justifiably, been avoiding him for the past few days, probably by way of dissuading further questions about Bashir. If Worf were not so indebted to Dax for saving his and Kor's lives on the Herc planet in the Gamma Quadrant, he would not have engaged in such tasteless behavior in the first place. The status of the Chief's friendships with the Doctor was no more his concern than it was the Ferengi bartender's. "Of course, Chief. Please, sit down." O'Brien gingerly took the seat across from Worf. The Chief's nose was wrinkled in the manner that many humans did around Klingon food. Worf had never understood how a species with such inferior olfactory senses could be so averse to food that actually had a smell to it. "I was wondering if I could ask a favor." At Worf's affirmative nod, O'Brien continued. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened with Julian in the Gamma Quadrant." Worf blinked. He had not expected this. "How is it that I may be of service regarding that?" "When we crash-landed on Bopak 3, we were immediately surrounded by a platoon of Jem'Hadar. They kept us alive, and referring to us as targets, right up until Julian said he was a doctor. After that, they put us in a holding cell. We both figured they needed medical assistance. I told Julian not to help them. If we had any kind of power over them, we needed to use it. Naturally. The Jem'Hadar first was named Goranagar. He had kicked the addiction to that white drug of theirs, and he thought it was because of something on the planet. Julian and I pretended to help him while I worked out a way to escape, but another Jem'Hadar caught me at it." He shuddered. I thought they were going to kill me there. But this Goranagar was determined to get all his men to kick the white habit, and he knew Julian wouldn't keep working if I was dead. Goranagar was playing Julian, telling him what he wanted to hear. You know what he's like. As soon as he gets a medical problem to sink his teeth into, he won't let go until he's solved it. It never occurred to him to think of what the consequences might be. I mean, he's always been a little bit naive, but this is the Jem'Hadar we're talking about." "I assume you reminded him." O'Brien nodded. "But he insisted. He even ordered me to keep working at one point." When O'Brien's pause went on for several seconds, Worf prompted, "What happened?" "I had to get a component from the runabout, but I managed to escape using the transporter. When the Jem'Hadar were searching, I went to get Julian." O'Brien bit his lip. "He wouldn't come. He told me to go ahead and leave if I had to, but he was going to stay behind to see if Goranagar's condition could be duplicated. I knew that nothing I said was going to change his mind. He was going to stay there. Never mind that the Jem'Hadar are the enemy. Never mind that the Jem'Hadar might show up and try to kill them all. Never mind that Goranagar's own men were as likely as not to turn on him. So I blew up his research." "You disobeyed a direct order." "I didn't have a choice," O'Brien said defensively, even though Worf was not accusing him of anything, merely stating a fact. "If he stayed behind..." He hesitated. "Of course, he also might have found a cure. And who knows, it might have been the best thing in the end, but we didn't know. At the time, I was so sure of myself, but now..." He regarded Worf with an almost pleading look in his eyes. "What would you have done in my place, Commander?" Worf leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "I would not have been in your place. I outrank Dr. Bashir." "That's not what I meant. My point is, Chief, that this is your story. I cannot act in it, only interpret it." He paused. "In Klingon tradition, obedience is paramount. As a rule, One does not even question the order of a superior. As a rule. Nodding, Worf said, but if a superior is acting in an irrational manner, Klingon Defense Force regulations require a challenge to remove the superior, rather than obey an order from such a warrior. Do you feel the Doctor was acting irrationally? He was, after all, consorting with the enemy, aiding them. Well, I don't know that I'd go that far. But you did what you felt was right. Yes! Kaga came by then with the blood pie. After he set it down, he asked O'Brien if he wanted anything. The Tacnar gizzards are fresh today! Again, the chief's nose wrinkled. No, thanks, I'm not staying. As you wish. Kaga bowed and took his leave. Worf took a bite, which was the best he'd had since the last time he'd had his human foster mother's pie. If the Doctor was consorting with the enemy, then your actions were proper, and you were true to yourself. In the end, that is all we can aspire to. Well, he was and he wasn't. At Worf's questioning glance, O'Brien added, I mean, he's a doctor. To him, they weren't Jem'Hadar, they were patients. He was trying to cure them. That's what he does. Then he was true to himself. In which case, neither of you has anything to be ashamed of. Maybe. O'Brien got up. I'll leave you to your dessert, sir. Thank you for your help. You are welcome, Worf said, though based on the fact that O'Brien looked as perturbed when he exited as he had when he came in, the Klingon doubted that he truly provided a service. On the other hand, perhaps now Dax would leave him alone on the subject. Mind if I join you? Dax turned around to see Bashir catching up to her on the promenade. I was just heading to the Replomat to get a Ractigino, and of course you can join me. I even promised not to say a word about Chief O'Brien. At that, Bashir chuckled, which Dax took as a good sign. She'd asked the occasional probing question over the past few days, with even less luck than she had the first time in Quarks, to the point where the Doctor seemed to be avoiding her company. Actually, the Chief is what I want to talk about. They each ordered from the replicators, Dax her Klingon coffee, Bashir a mug of chamomile tea, claiming that his stomach was a bit upset, and found a two-person table. After an awkward pause, Bashir finally started to speak. You've read the reports we wrote about what happened on Bopak 3. Dax nodded. What we didn't include in the report was what happened between Miles and myself. Bashir hesitated, drank some of his tea, then proceeded to tell Dax about the Rubicon crash landing, their capture by First Garanagar, and Bashir's ever more futile attempts to find out what in the planet's atmosphere led to that one Jem'Hadar's ability to produce the health-stabilizing enzyme that others of his kind could only obtain from Ketracel White. Miles didn't want to have anything to do with it. He said we shouldn't help them under any circumstances. Bashir blew out of breath. Actually, his exact words were, "We do not help them, and that's the end of it." At that, Dax had to put down her Ractigino or risk spluttering it. He said that. Bashir gazed at Dax with his wide eyes. I actually had to give him an order to cooperate. It was an odd feeling, I can assure you. Well, you were the ranking officer, Julian. What I can't believe is that you had to do it in the first place. Chief O'Brien had no authority to make a statement like that. Even if he had a point, she thought, but she didn't say aloud. O'Brien's concerns were legitimate, though Bashir's enthusiasm also wasn't without cause. I sent him to the Rubicon to retrieve a part, but he used the transporter to escape. The Jem'Hadar went off to chase him down, and he doubled back to get me. He wanted to leave, but I couldn't. I told him to go ahead and take the runabout, but I was staying behind. I couldn't just abandon the Jem'Hadar. Leaving aside any other considerations, they only had a limited supply of white left. If I didn't find a cure soon, they were all going to die. Dax knew where this was going. She knew both men well enough to know that neither was likely to back down in these circumstances. He destroyed your research. Yes, Bashir said, surprised. He said I could bring him up on charges later, but now we had to leave. There was nothing keeping me there now. Bashir finished off his tea. It was odd. I mean, he's the chief. He's been in Starfleet for ages. And he's my friend, and I thought he had more respect for me than that. But to so utterly dismiss my orders, my opinions, me, like that, by just saying I could bring him up on charges, obviously meant that whatever I did or not was irrelevant. That I was irrelevant. And that he was unrepentant. He shook his head. That's ultimately why I didn't bring charges. I mean, what would be the point? I can't believe he did that, Dax said, though truthfully she had no trouble believing it. He had no business even questioning your orders like that. And to out and out ignore your authority, it's just... She slammed her mug down. It's not like he doesn't know you. I mean, there are some non-coms who think officers are all useless, but I thought O'Brien had more sense than that, especially regarding you. Honestly, Julian, I think you should bring him up on charges. I know it's been a few weeks, but I think Benjamin will understand. Bashir put a hand on Dax's wrist. Jadzia, about time, Dax thought. What? I don't think Miles would have done what he did without good reason. If he didn't think it through, if he didn't believe in what he was doing. Did you think through what you were doing? Bashir straightened, and only then did Dax realize that, uncharacteristically, the doctor had been slouching throughout the conversation. Of course! I had a chance to cure them. I could hardly turn my back. Have you told the chief that? Whatever puppeteer returned Bashir's posture, then clipped the strings, and he slouched again. They sat in silence for several seconds before Bashir got up, went to the replicator, and ordered another tea. But instead of returning to the table, he wandered off toward the infirmary. Letting out a growl worthy of Worf, Dax finished off Heractigino. This is worse than I thought. When Miles O'Brien entered Garak's tailor shop, he realized with a start that it was the first time he had set foot in the place since it blew up a year ago. O'Brien had never trusted Cardassians. He'd seen too much during his time on the Rutledge, and Garak was especially untrustworthy. However, the shop's door wouldn't close, which was something of a security concern, so O'Brien, at the request of both Garak and Odo, went to fix the problem. Garak spoke amiably when O'Brien arrived with his toolkit. Thank you for coming, Chief. While I normally am loath to take you away from what must be more pressing duties, I fear that my shop would be far too tempting a target for vandals if the door were left wide open at any time other than normal business hours. No problem. He knelt down and pried the cover off the door control panel. There were no customers in the shop at the moment, which disheartened O'Brien. It meant he was in serious danger of being the only object of Garak's seemingly endless capacity for conversation. There were people O'Brien could talk to while working. Dax, Worf, most of the Defiant engineering staff, the captain, but Garak was most assuredly not one of them. Sure enough, the tailor kept talking. It's good to see such dedication. I freely admit that there is much about your Federation that I disapprove of, but the work ethic among you of Starfleet is quite unparalleled. I'd say it's worthy of a Cardassian, which I suppose doesn't mean as much to you as it does to me, but still, it comes from the heart. I'm sure it does, O'Brien said, for lack of any better rejoinder. And, of course, you could have passed this on to one of your staff, especially given your antipathy toward me. O'Brien gritted his teeth as he searched for a programming cause for the door to be broken, but the computer functions were all fine. Garak obviously noted O'Brien's displeasure as he added, Now then, Chief, don't try to hide it. I would be a poor shop owner if I did not have a certain capacity for observation. And even the meanest intelligence can see that you don't like me. I'm sure you have your reasons, especially given your past history with my people, and I respect that. I respect even more your willingness to put that aside to help me out of my little difficulty. Does he ever shut up? O'Brien wondered as he checked the physical mechanism to see if it was jammed in some way. Who is he fooling anyhow? It's not like his past as an Obsidian Order agent is much of a secret anymore, if it ever was. Then again, you seem to have a great deal more free time of late, what with your lovely wife and child spending most of their time on Bajor, and you and Dr. Bashir having ended your friendship. That tears it. O'Brien switched off his Magna spanner, looked up, and faced the Cardassian. Look, I'll fix your door for you, Garak, and I'll also thank you to stay out of my private life. Looking shocked at O'Brien's reaction, Garak held up his hands, and his mouth formed an O. My apologies, Chief. Believe me, offending you was the last thing I intended. Good. He knelt back down and switched the Magna spanner back on. Worf is one thing. He's a friend. But he saw no reason to let this Cardassian pseudo-spy stick his neck in, as it were. Besides, it was a foregone conclusion in any case. A fervent desire for Garak to shut up warred with curiosity as to what he meant by that last statement within O'Brien's mind. Against his better judgment, the latter prevailed. What was? Well, you and the good doctor. The amazing thing is that you've been able to stand being in each other's company at all. After all, you're an enlisted man, an engineer, a family man. Dr. Bashir is an officer and a gentleman, as you humans put it, with no family to speak of. You don't have the same interests, except for a few silly games. Indeed, your sojourn to the Gamma Quadrant quite admirably displayed just how little you two have in common. It was wise of you to go your separate ways. I doubt that any other outcome was even possible. Before O'Brien could even consider formulating a response to this, two things happened. A Lecepian walked in, and O'Brien noted that 2 isolinear rods were in the wrong place. While Garak asked how he could help the Lecepian, O'Brien put the rods in their proper slots and then closed the door. "Ah!" Garak said. "Excuse me a moment," he said to the Lecepian, who bowed by way of affirmation. "Thank you, Chief. I am most grateful." Opening the door once again, O'Brien said, "I'd watch out for those vandals you mentioned. Someone switched a couple of the isolinear rods, caused the commands to reroute. Anytime the computer received an instruction to close the door, it was read as a request to open it. I will maintain vigilance as you suggest. Again, Chief, my thanks. Don't mention it. Please don't mention it." Without another word, he turned his back on the meddlesome tailor and headed to his quarters to change. He had a date with a holosuite. An hour later, he was dressed in the one-piece black outfit with blue and yellow highlights that he wore when he went kayaking. The suit kept him warm and dry, leaving only his head exposed. As he headed up the stairs to the second level of Quark's where the holosuites were housed, the bartender flagged him down. "Chief, there's been a slight change in plan. You're in holosuite 3. Rom has to do some kind of maintenance thing or other on number 2. "Whatever," O'Brien said. He didn't care which holosuite they put him in, so long as it had a kayak and a facsimile of the Colorado River in it. Working his way down the Colorado with nothing to focus on but his arms' movements with the oar was just what he needed right now. He'd spent most of the last week cleaning up the mess Rom made of the Defiant when the aftermath of the True Way's assassination attempt at the station's senior staff necessitated hooking the warship's transporter to the holosuites. Between that and his usual duties, he'd been going full tilt. Now, though, he could lose himself in the rhythm of kayaking. Left stroke, right stroke, left stroke, right stroke. No need to figure out why the door is broken, or which Cardassian subsystem still, after over 3 years, wouldn't interface properly with the Federation processor, or what Rom was thinking when he wired the Defiant transporter, or why everyone and her bloody sister seemed concerned with whether or not he and Julian were talking to each other. If I can just get through this without hurting my shoulder again. Just as he had that thought, he came upon a sharp bend. O'Brien sliced his oar through the water on his left twice to get the kayak to turn, but he didn't move fast enough. The kayak started to capsize. Bloody hell! Water filled his mouth, nose, and ears as he found himself unceremoniously dunked into the river. Pinwheeling his arms and legs in an attempt to right himself, he tried to swim for the shore, but the current took control of him. If I can just get my head above water, he thought frantically, I can get the computer to shut the damn thing off. Pain shot through his left shoulder as it collided with something heavy just as his eyes cleared. Realizing he was at the shore, he clambered forward, hoping that it would take him away from the river and not back into it. Coughing water, he managed to crab walk his way out of the river, his kayak and oars lost to the current. But they're not real anyhow. The pain in his shoulder lessened a bit. If I'm lucky, it's just wrenched a bit, and I won't have to see feet. O'Brien coughed some more and blinked the water out of his eyes, but as he lay there on the shore of the Colorado River, he definitely saw 2 feet. Human feet, shod in what looked to be leather shoes. Too well polished for someone standing on the shores of a river, truth be known. Above them were immaculately tailored ankle cuffs. He looked up. Clad in an old-fashioned tuxedo and holding some kind of projectile weapon was Julian Bashir, who asked, "What are you doing here?" O'Brien's attempt to answer resulted in more coughing, as some of the water was still lodged in his throat. Bashir kindly helped him up and slapped him on the back in an attempt to get him to cough up the remaining water. "How did you wind up kayaking on the French Riviera, Chief? I thought you preferred the Colorado." "French? This is the Colorado!" Then O'Brien looked up and saw the resort just a few meters away. He shook his head. "Rom. Probably melded the programs by mistake. Or Quark misassigned the holosuites. Or both." O'Brien stared at Bashir for a moment. "Look, Julian, Chief, An awkward pause followed. "You first, Chief." "No, Julian, it's all right. You go first. Please, I insist." Then Bashir let loose with that idiotic grin of his, the one that made O'Brien want to punch him the first time he saw it. Age before beauty. The Chief decided to just give in and go first, but seeing that damn grin made the apology he was going to utter catch in his throat, as he found himself remembering all of the Doctor's most annoying qualities all at once. "You know what's funny? When we first met, I really, really hated you." Bashir blinked. "I knew you didn't care much for me." Snorting, O'Brien said, "If you did know, you did a lousy job of showing it. You're pretentious, annoying, irritating, self-centered. He bared his teeth. It wasn't really a smile. You, Julian Bashir, are a ponce. The not a smile waned. And yet I remember you telling me one time that you admired me and respected me. For the life of me, I couldn't understand why. I mean, what in God's name would you look up at me for? I'm just a regular engineer going to work every day. You're a doctor, top of your class, good-looking, athletic. You beat Vulcans at racquetball. You put together alien comm systems with a dying engineer to give you half-baked instructions. You save lives. I just put machinery together. What the hell do you see in me to respect? Shaking his head, Bashir said, Don't you see, Miles? That's it. What's it? You're a regular engineer going to work every day. Yes, I've done all the things you say. All my life, I've always known the things I wanted. Whatever they were, I got them, easily. Things have always come easily to me. Yet there you were, happy with your family, your life, your career. Much happier than I've ever been able to be. I found true love in medical school, and I gave it up for my career. You found true love on the Enterprise, and made it work with your career. Not only that, but look at what you've done. Fighting the Cardassians, the Borg, the Romulans. Yet all the while, you're still you. Still happy, still content, still... Again, he let that damn grin loose. Still the chief. You don't know how much I envy you, Miles. Because with all I've accomplished, it can't even begin to compare to what you have. Remembering Garak's words, O'Brien said, I guess what we have in common is that we don't have anything in common. Perhaps. Bashir started to pace around the rocky shore. And that's what made Bopak 3 hurt so much. Here it comes. Yes, I admire you, respect you as much or more than anyone else on the station. That's why what you did hurt so much. It also made me second-guess myself. O'Brien put a hand on Bashir's shoulder. You've got nothing to second-guess, Julian. Don't I? You were right about everything. Leaving aside every other possibility, I was never going to figure out a way to work around centuries of genetic engineering with one makeshift laboratory in the 26 hours I had left before the platoon's white ran out. If we stayed behind, we would have died, whether or not I found any kind of cure. Maybe. But you swore an oath to save lives, to do no harm. And I took an oath as well, to obey my superiors. Even though I disagreed with you, I never should have acted the way I did. I should have raised my objections, not lectured you like you were some kind of academy cadet. And if you still insisted on helping Goranagar, then it was my duty to help you to do as you said, not to undermine you like that. Bashir turned to face O'Brien. Remember what you said after Goranagar refused to come with us? I'm not sure. O'Brien, in fact, was fairly sure he knew to what the doctor was referring, but if he was wrong, he did not think it would be politic to remind Bashir of it. You said, he's their commander. They trusted him. I was your commander. You didn't trust me. O'Brien found he couldn't look Bashir in the eyes. No, I didn't. I guess... He hesitated, then chuckled. I guess I was still thinking of you as a ponce. Bashir smirked. Well, I do make a good one. He looked down, especially in this outfit. I'm sorry, Julian. The words that wouldn't come before came tumbling out of O'Brien's mouth now. I shouldn't have thought so little of you to disobey you so easily. Now he did look at the doctor in the eyes. It won't happen again, sir. Bashir returned the gaze for several seconds. Then that grin came out again. Somehow, though, O'Brien didn't find it irritating this time. Don't call me sir. I work for a living. The chief snorted. Nice try, Lieutenant. Come on, Bashir said. Why don't we let Quark know that the holosuite's not working, and then see if the dot board's free. The dartboard rang out with the sound of a bullseye. Quark thought someday someone's going to have to explain to me what a bull is and what its eye has to do with this game. The sound was certainly not unwelcome. It mixed in nicely with the cries of Dabo from the wheels, the hum of conversation from the tables, and the wails of anguish from the two Tellarites Jake Sisko was hustling at the Domjot table. Of course, the visuals were a little bizarre, even by Quark's high standards. Usually when Bashir and O'Brien played their dart game, they were in uniform. Now, however, O'Brien was wearing that unfortunate one-piece thing he always wore when he went kayaked, and Bashir was dressed in that outfit Garak referred to as a tuxedo. Quark was considering taking bets on which one of them looked more foolish, especially since it was impossible to choose between them. They were also laughing like old friends. At the end of the bar, Dax sat next to Morn, nursing an Alira punch and grinning ear to ear. Well, Quark said, approaching her, I haven't seen you looking this happy since the last time you fleeced me at the Tongo wheel. Oh, I'm happier than that. Look at them. Do I have to? Look at them, I mean? Fine, don't. Dax laughed. Just take their money. Grinning, Quark said, that I'm glad to do. Dax then regarded him with those beautiful eyes. Thanks, Quark. I owe you one. Oh, you owe me more than that one. You know how long it took Rom to rewire the holosuite so those two would think they were in the right program? Knowing Rom, about 15 minutes. Nice try, Quark. I owe you one. Quark shrugged. Can't blame a Ferengi for trying. I'll settle for a rematch of that Tongo game. Tonight, after closing. You're on. Good. Now, if you'll excuse me, both of our dart players have empty glasses. I need to rectify this appalling situation. He then grabbed a tray and approached the pair, just as Bashir's dart hit very close to the middle. Gentlemen, Quark said, who's winning? Bashir looked at O'Brien. O'Brien looked at Bashir. Each then pointed to the other and said, he is. Then they started laughing. On the other hand, maybe those two have had enough. After a moment, nah. Can I refill your drinks? Definitely, Bashir said. And keep them coming, O'Brien added. Quark smiled. Your wish is my command. And for the rest of the evening, O'Brien and Bashir's dartboard remained used. That story, again, is in Prophecy and Change, which was published in 2003 in honor of the 10th anniversary of Deep Space Nine. There's a lot of really good stories in here. Christopher L. Bennett, Heather Jarman, Jeffrey Lang, Michael A. Martin and Andy Mangels, Una McCormick, Terry Osborne, Kevin G. Summers, Jeffrey Thorne, and, best of all, Andrew J. Robinson. The guy who played Garak actually wrote a Garak story for this anthology, which is really, really cool. It's really good. This is actually the first story by Una McCormick, who has gone on to write a ton of Trek fiction, including most recently the Star Trek Picard prequel novel, Last Best Hope. And everybody in this book has a history of writing other nifty fiction here and there. So you should check it out. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. You can find me online at DeCandido.net. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD with all sorts of nifty content coming up. You can read my stuff on Tor.com, including an entire rewatch of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I've also rewatched the original Star Trek, The Next Generation, and I'm in the midst of a Star Trek Voyager rewatch. And there are also reviews of each episode of Discovery, Short Treks, and Picard on the site as well. And you can also read my blog at decandido.wordpress.com. Thank you very much, and please stay safe.